Hi, my name's Mustafa. A couple of things. When I arrived yesterday, I went into the speakers room and I said, how many people still working on their slides? And everyone doing a keynote raised their hand. I said, I did mine 2 weeks ago. I was like, ooh, I said, that's good. The problem is, I'm doing a case study about Google+. So the moral of the story is, never do anything on time, always be late. And with that, oh, and the other thing is, I walk around a lot, and this stage is really dangerous. So it's like, if I fall, anyways, enough comedy. So why is speed important? This talk is all about speed, not just real speed, but perceptual speed. And I like telling stories. And next slide. Okay. So if there's anything you get from today, it's this concept of occupied time versus unoccupied time. There's a famous story with Houston Airport where passengers were complaining about how long it would take to get their suitcases when they landed. So Houston Airport optimized the process down to about 7 minutes. And people still complained, like it was taking too long. Then what they did was they started parking the plane further away from the terminal, and complaints dropped to 0. Now, the reason for this is if you occupy people's time, even if it's the same amount of time, it feels less and shorter. So even though the time and the space is identical, because people have filled their time with walking instead of waiting, it feels shorter. So if we take this conceptually, and most of the talk is going to be about this kind of concept of occupying people's time to hack user perception. This is just something to remember if you remember anything from this talk. So this is about perception. The Financial Times in London is like, for those of you who don't know, is a specialist newspaper specifically about finance. Now, they're really meticulous in analyzing user data and targeting specific users, simply because they have a paywall. So it's really expensive for them to target every user, so they break it down into segments. And they try to target the users, which they call the tipping point. So if a user comes to the site at least 5 times a month, reading 5 articles a month, they try to encourage them to get them to be 9 times a month, and then they will most likely subscribe. And because their budget is finite, they always target that core group, because that's the one that will convert. But what they found is, by making the site 1 second faster, they increased engagement for all of the users. So it's really valuable just to be fast. Likewise, the opposite is also true. If you make sites slower, and you will have seen this in Sam's talk, and you'll see this quite a lot from talks from Google, this 53% of like abandon rate. It's really important that you make sites fast, and there's also a few other numbers, like for every 2 seconds, bounce rate goes up, and conversion drops for every second lost. So speed is really, really important. But user behavior is affected by many different things, and how they actually treat your site and how they feel if it's fast or slow. So we have the occupied time concept. We have intention, which we're going to talk about, state of mind, state of body. We also have importance. Now, importance is the anomaly here. When you do user research, sometimes you see users will wait 10, 20 seconds. The reason why that is if the task is really, really important, the other ones can be contradicted. So for example, if you're in a foreign country and you're waiting for a map to download, it's really critical that you find the place you're looking for. So you will wait a long time. Or if the information is life or death, that's the anomaly. But generally speaking, the other things will affect the user much more. So intention. About 30%, 29% of users actually, when they visit a website, they actually have a goal or a thing that they're trying to achieve. So if you think about the Financial Times example, just by making a second faster, you could potentially engage with the other 30%, which are like the drifters that might or might not do something. Obviously, this depends on the market that you're working in. So 57% of users will actually go to a website, like financial websites, will actually go with an intention. And again, this makes logical sense. Why? Because people don't visit bank websites for fun, right? So by making your site faster, you can actually maybe increase your engagement, much like the Financial Times did. Now this, again, most of this is very obvious. Most people will visit mobile web from home, and when they're at home, it's like a natural state. They're really relaxed, and they're more likely to do something. It's kind of odd that a mobile device is most likely to be used at home, because you think conceptually it should be mobile. But people are more comfortable at home, number one, and number two, internet connection is much more stable. And what you find is the same experiences are actually faster at home. Again, Wi-Fi connection, but this shows an opportunity where you can actually improve your speed, can actually improve the engagement. Sam also showed this as well. When you look at the behavior of mobile and desktop, people have kind of a browsing mentality when they're on mobile. So if they're on an e-commerce site, throughout the day, they'll add stuff to cart. But then when they get to the end of the day, they actually check out on desktop. And this is quite strange. I mean, what is happening there? Why are people not trusting web experiences? I believe it's to do with speed. I believe it's to do with trust. Even though the mobile device, in terms of data, you put more stuff probably on your mobile device than you do on your desktop, but the actual checkout, so what is going on, and what can we do to mitigate these things? When you actually ask users, and I'm going to share like the research study, there's like an ebook which I'll share at the end, speed is always on top. They say it's the most important thing for them. And likewise, when you look at what we call the UX hierarchy, the site loading fast is the most important thing for users. Now, I'm a designer, so it's really depressing to see how attractive a site looks at the bottom. But you know, they say forever form follows function. Having a beautiful font is important for a brand, but for the user, having the article or thing load is much more important and critical. So that's one thing, again, to take into consideration. But speed is broken down into two parts. We have the real, technical, small images, minified code, etc., etc. And then you have the perceived. Now, one of my colleagues, Paul Backhouse, did a talk, I think last year, about speed, and he discovered that people perceive things like 80 milliseconds slower than reality. So we already naturally are actually seeing things with a delay. And likewise, this is very scary. What we found is 30% of users perceive technically fast sites as slow. And by slow, we mean sites that load within 4 seconds. So what's going on? If you're making your site, you put an effort into minifying images, making, you know, all the technical stuff that you guys all know, why is this not translating in the perceived speed? And another interesting fact, the younger people are, the slower things feel. And again, you know, you could say this is adrenaline. The more adrenaline someone has in their system, the faster they're processing things and the slower things become. So it becomes even more critical if your user group or your clients are actually a young audience. You have to really make sure that you're hacking this perception. And again, when people are standing up, things feel much slower, and when they're on the move, when people are sat down, things feel actually much more close to reality. So again, you can see why people are actually viewing websites from home, sat down, relaxed, as opposed to walking around, trying to do multiple things at the same time. So really, speed is not just a matter of technical, but it's about the perception. So I give a lot of boring numbers. You guys can see that afterwards. But now I'm going to talk about some of the technical things that you can do, and Google+, that you could do to your actual websites and applications. So again, remember this fact. So this is a general guide. If you want your sites to feel really fast, like 200 milliseconds, I mean, this goes for Android apps as well, so any kind of application, this will feel really fast. The 5-second one is an actually interesting concept. If a user is going through an actual flow and they've committed to it, having a 5-second delay is acceptable to a certain extent, but you want to make sure that you're actually getting the main content in front of them as quickly as possible. And by 8 seconds, you would have lost their attention completely. Because if you think about any experience, it's not single to your website or your web application. It's life. Someone could be at the supermarket. Kids could be crying. Television on. The gas cooker is on. You have to live in this kind of environment, and you're trying to grab users' attention in this environment. If your site is slow, it will feel even slower in that kind of world. Now, I'm not an engineer. I'm 100% sure this is technically right. But With web browsers on mobile, what they will do is they will disable any kind of interactivity for about 300 milliseconds. Now, when we think about perception, we're thinking about seeing, but perception is seeing, feeling, and everything else in between. So if a user's tapping a button on your website or web application and it's not responding, it will feel slower. So if you add this to like the head of your document, it removes that kind of tapping display. Likewise, responsive touch feedback. Now this is like material design where we have a ripple. So when a user touches something, it ripples from the center of where they touched it. But you have to think about this conceptually. What does touch feedback actually do? It reaffirms to the user that what they're doing is alive and working. Like you see, sometimes users will press submit on a form and they don't see anything, so they press it again and press it again. Basically, that just continues to fire the action over and over again, and the action isn't completed, and they abandon the experience. By having sort of a touchback mechanism, you're reaffirming to the user, no, you are in control, and this is working and this is alive. So again, perceptively, this feels faster. And the website stopped working. Woohoo! There we go. This is a very weird one. So the way you animate and pulsate actually makes a big difference. So progress bars, if you're having progress bars, if you see the third one from the bottom, users think that appears, 11% of users feel that it's much faster than the others, even though it's animating at the same speed. That's because if something starts animating really slowly and starts pulsating as it goes along, it feels faster, because it's like a sense of urgency. So any kind of progression that you demonstrate, you want to start slow and build up, and it will appear faster. So that's another thing that you can actually do. Animation is always hard on the web. So if you're going to do it, the way you can mask speed is having like start slow, like with a progress bar, and you can cover other things as they load. Now you don't want to be animating all the time. So a good space is when a user puts in their credit card details and they press submit, that may be an interesting place to put animation. Again, to distract the user, because that's the scariest thing for a user when they've put their credit card details in a site. So again, it's about masking and reaffirming and reassuring the user every single point. Likewise, it's really important to stagger animation. And by stagger, we mean it starts off slow and then suddenly builds up on a natural curve. Using kind of delightful details as we have in material design. So if you see the icons, they're like, again, doing really nice, cool animation. Again, this is very expensive on the web at times. So you have to pick and choose the things that you really want to work on. But just having these small details, again, it's like reassuring and reaffirming to the user that the thing that you're working on is alive. Now, skeleton screens. Can you see that? You can't see anything. Oh, there you go. So skeleton screens, gray boxes. You see this implemented in quite a few places. LinkedIn does it, Medium. The thing is with skeleton screens, that's really important, is what we see with progress bars is you block all of the content until it's ready, and then you replace it with the animation with the content. This is actually not a good way of implementing any kind of progression. As a designer, I always want the thing the user sees to be the best of the best, but users prefer a staggered approach. So as soon as content is ready to load, you actually show it. So instead of waiting for everything to come at once, the moment something is ready, you demonstrate it. I don't know if this is going to look very good on the screen, but let's try. The worst thing you can do is a blank screen. Now, Chrome animates, if you see the blue bar at the top, progress, but users can sometimes actually miss that. So this is the worst thing to do, because again, occupied time versus unoccupied time. You're making the user feel like they're waiting longer. The next thing to do, or again, it's not great, is spinner. Now, a spinner doesn't actually really tell the user what's going on. Again, it just fills it with a void. It's better than showing nothing, but ideally, you don't really want to do that, because we'll talk about this in a sec, but you have this concept of thinking and doing. A spinner seems like the app or website is thinking, and that's not actually a good thing for the user. The one on from that is skeleton screens, as you can see there. When you ask users, do they like them? Generally, they say no, because it just feels broken on their own. But the better approach is combining lots of different things. So Google Maps does this, YouTube does this as well. is we'll have a staggered approach, so the animation will come in slow and then build up. But then more importantly, you have metadata. So if you can see, like at this point, you see like it will say the title of the article, it'll give some sort of context to the user of what's coming. Again, this actually just reaffirms what is actually happening to the user. And they prefer this because you want to give them context. Sites can be slow for a number of reasons. Like in London, where I'm from, you have this thing called dead zones. So you'd be on the underground, like the metro train, you will lose connectivity for like 10 seconds and then it will come back on again. You don't know where your website's going to be viewed. You want to make sure that you can use some of these hacking techniques to reaffirm and reassure the user at every single point. And just doing these little small micro things makes huge differences. So you can see like all of the animations in one go. Is it timed? Yay! There we go. You can't see it from the screen, but there's lots of gray boxes there. So YouTube, what we do is you're thinking about loading from a conceptual point of view. The most important content comes first. So the video is always shown, right? Thumbnails are important, but when it comes to the stack of what should come first, it's the video. So again, when you're implementing any progress, whichever pattern you want to use, always think about the important thing should always come first, and you should always stagger as much as possible. And again, it's like this concept of processing versus progressing. Like I said, as a designer, visually, I prefer the processing because once it's ready, it loads. But for a user's point of view, the one progressing feels faster because you can actually see it. Sometimes doing a progress bar which has a percent is hard because you don't know how long something's going to take. But if you can stagger the content and stagger the information that's coming through, that can work in your favor. So you want to be progressing, not processing. Or you want to be working, not thinking in your user interfaces. So navigational patterns. We've spoken about progress bars and loading, skeleton screens, but navigational patterns and the tactile will actually affect how users perceive the speed of your interface. Now in material design, we have like a web components, material design components for web, which you can download for free at GitHub. But these are like material patterns. So top tabs, again, if you use the Android to be familiar with this, the important thing here is if you're going to use any icon, always use a label. We live in an international world. You don't know who's actually viewing the things that you're working on. If you just have an icon, you leave things down to interpretation. So for example, YouTube has a flame. Fire flame could mean anything in multiple cultures. We know it as hot, as in the latest thing, but not everyone does. So you should always have like a label to associate with it. You may want to add a setting in your websites that will say, okay, disable labels, because muscle memory will remember the icon first, but that's only if you understand the meaning. Bottom navigation, very popular, really good if you have distinct destinations, which are very different from one another. Floating action menu button, again, if you're familiar with the Android system, you will know this quite well. This kind of navigational pattern is great for forcing the user to take a single action, so adding something, taking away. And it also will change depending on the context of the screen. Top bars, again, they're like system bars. And then we have a new thing in Material called app bars on the bottom. And then you can actually combine it with the fab as well. And the dreaded navigational drawer, or hamburger menu. Now, some interfaces require lots of buttons, lots of navigational points. But it's important to know that out of sight is out of mind. If your interface, if you have core actions, you don't put them here. This is like for sections or actions which are not going to be commonly used. Because people won't know to look there. You can't assume that everyone knows your product inside out or knows it as well as you do. So this is a good pattern for like really big e-commerce sites, but use with caution. And also we have this new concept called the backdrop. It's very similar to hamburger menu, but items are appearing underneath the screen. And if you notice, everything else gets disabled, and the focal point becomes the secondary navigation. So what navigational patterns should you use? What works best? Yeah, Google+. This was so great a week ago. The information still stands though, and it's about how we went from hiding navigations and the effect of the users and simplified it. Now, we say at Google that it's not data-driven, it's data-informed. Just putting any items in the bottom navigation doesn't necessarily make it successful or popular. You have to be thinking, what is the most important to the user, and promoting that. So when you actually look, well, when we used to look, what was more engaged with, you found that users were more likely to do stuff when they engage with the communities as opposed to adding events. But it was strange that events were promoted as a high-level navigational item. So you find that when someone joins a community, they're more likely to post, they're more likely to comment, more likely to +1. Obviously not anymore, but it was the case back then. So we said, okay, in this kind of data-informed concept, if we actually highlight and promote the call to actions which are most likely engaged with, guess what happens? Engagement goes up. Not anymore. But honestly, it really did. So what you find is, out of sight, out of mind. It's not about just chucking every single navigation item that you can think of. It's about understanding what your users are actually doing on your actual apps and websites. So when we add stuff, it's out of sight, is out of mind, and you have a huge impact. So when you're thinking about hacking perception of users, hacking user perception, you have to be thinking about and understanding what your users are doing in your websites and applications. That is really critical. And you know, it's like bottom navigation has been a very successful pattern at Google. We've been implementing it in a lot of our products, but it's understanding what features users are engaging with. That's the key thing. Just going with any trend is always bad if you don't understand what your users are doing. So at every point you really want to research and find out more. Facebook also found this. Like when they actually used bottom navigation, the perception of speed increased. Why? Because if a user can see the button, it feels quicker, as opposed to clicking on a hamburger menu and seeing the item. So thinking about putting your core navigational items front and center is really key. Same thing with Redbooth, they saw engagement go up on the sections that they promoted. Same thing with Spotify. Again, it's where you're making a choice in your application. What is it that you want your users to do? That's the thing that you promote. Again, it's not about having a black bar at the bottom with icons and labels. Think about it conceptually. If you want users to do something, make it as obvious as possible to them that they're actually doing what you want them to do, as well as understand what they're trying to do. And with some of the Android apps, we've seen the fabs being very popular because, again, you're forcing the user to take a single action, so it feels faster and it feels much more targeted. And the same with Trello. We see this again and again. Promoting your core actions, your main call to actions, and making it as super obvious to the user will make your experiences really quick and feel fast. So, you know, when it comes to hacking user perception, out of sight is definitely out of mind. You want to make sure that you promote what it is that you want the user to do. Sometimes that can be very difficult for app makers because it means you have to make a choice, but having that informed choice will make a big difference. I think I may have done that really quickly. I don't know how long have I got left? A lot of time left? I knew I was going to do this. Well, a talk on speed has to be really fast, right? It also means more break and more coffee. Yeah, sure. So in summary, you want to avoid blank screens as much as possible. If you give users that anticipation and fear of not knowing, then things will feel much slower. If using bold animation and placeholders hello, do you want me to answer that? Using like skeleton screens really makes a difference. You want to give this concept of progressing, not processing, so that the app feels like it's working rather than thinking. And you know, distracting the user as much as possible. And then with any navigational item, put it front and center. So whatever the core thing that you're trying to do, make sure you promote that. It's really critical because users don't know. They don't work on your app and website day to day. You do. So you want to make it as super obvious at every single point. And remember, always park the plane away from the terminal whenever you can. We have a book, an ebook on this. So what's really good about this ebook is it has Sam and Eva's stuff in there. So when Eva spoke yesterday about images and like having a strategy for like prioritizing certain images over another, and Sam has a whole bunch of techniques in this ebook, like what you can do technically. Also, a lot of the data that I've spoken about appears in the ebook as well. So feel free to download that and enjoy. We also have a new ebook coming out in about a week's time about progressive web apps, which is written by some amazing writers. So stay tuned, and thank you.